When I told my children about the rare illness I had been diagnosed with, they simply replied that they had other priorities. The care and concern came instead from the person I least expected, the illegitimate son my husband had hidden for 35 years. My name is Denise Harper. I'm 67 years old, and I live in the state of Oregon, United States. Until a few months ago, I thought I understood what family meant. I lived with my daughter Laura in Portland, helping her take care of her 2 kids, cleaning the house, cooking, trying to feel useful even after being widowed for many years. I once believed I was spending my final years surrounded by love and family, but I was wrong. Everything began to change when I noticed my right hand trembling for no reason. At first, I tried to hide it, gripping my teacup tightly, pressing my hand against the table while eating. But the tremors became more noticeable, followed by other strange symptoms. My vision blurred occasionally. My body felt exhausted no matter how much I rested. And sometimes my speech grew heavy, as if my tongue refused to move. Laura was the first to notice. She looked at me with a mix of worry and annoyance, as if I were pretending or exaggerating. Every time I dropped a glass or plate, she sighed heavily, as though I were just an inconvenience. I tried to explain that something was wrong with my body, but she only said, "Mom, that's just old age. Don't make a big deal out of everything." Things got worse when I started forgetting. One time, I was cooking and suddenly couldn't remember what I was doing. I just stood there in the kitchen, lost. One morning, I woke up and couldn't even recall the name of my youngest grandson. Terrified, I burst into tears. Laura came into the kitchen and saw me in despair. But instead of comforting me, she said coldly, "Are you acting again, Mom? You just want attention, don't you?" Those words hurt more than any pain in my body. I, once strong and independent, who had raised 2 children alone while my husband worked far away, was now treated like a bothersome old woman, faking illness for sympathy. After many pleas, Laura finally agreed to take me to the doctor. Dr. Henry Collins, a neurologist she knew, examined me carefully, ordered tests, an MRI, and several procedures I had never even heard of. I felt hopeful, thinking I'd finally learn what was wrong and how to treat it. When the results came in, the doctor called Laura and me into his office. He said I had a rare neurological syndrome, a degenerative condition affecting the nervous system, causing exactly the symptoms I was experiencing. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't for attention. It was real, and it needed long-term treatment. Laura stayed silent the whole time. I felt both relieved to have an explanation and terrified about what lay ahead. The doctor said I would need regular support, physical therapy, expensive medication, and most importantly, patience and understanding from my family. On the way home, Laura drove without saying a word. I tried to discuss a treatment plan, but she just shook her head coldly. When we got home, she said she needed to talk with her husband, David. That night, I accidentally overheard them arguing in the living room. David said loudly that they already had too many expenses and couldn't afford my medical bills. Laura agreed, saying that I was becoming a burden, that they had other priorities. My heart shattered right then. I, the person who once supported them, who had sold my wedding ring to help Laura pay for college, was now seen as an outdated, inconvenient object. I cried silently, pressing a pillow to my face so no one could hear me. The next morning, Laura told me she had spoken with Michael, my oldest son. They had decided it would be best if I looked for a nursing home or applied for government assistance since they couldn't take care of me. Her tone was flat, as if she were talking about the weather. I looked at my daughter and asked, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me?" Laura replied, "We have our own priorities, Mom. You're an adult. You can take care of yourself." Those words echoed in my head like a hammer. That afternoon, Michael came over. He tried to sound gentle, but his message was the same that they had their own families, their own children, their jobs, and couldn't take me on. I asked if he remembered the nights I stayed awake, caring for his father when he was sick, or the times I pawned my jewelry to pay hospital bills. Michael just said, "That was different, Mom. You were his wife, not my mother." That night, for the first time in years, I felt truly alone. The two children I had carried, loved, and raised with all my heart had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. I thought about my own naivety, believing that family meant facing hardships together. I began calculating how much money I had left and wondered, with my small pension and meager savings, how long I could survive on my own. The amount wasn't much, not enough to cover medicine or special care. For the first time, growing old felt like a slow, lonely sentence. Laura became colder with each passing day, treating me like an unwelcome tenant in her own house. She often complained about bills right in front of me, sighing about financial struggles, hinting that I was the reason they were having a hard time. I tried to help as much as I could, washing dishes, cleaning, watching the kids, even though my hands trembled and my body ached. But it was never enough. Everything I did seemed wrong, another reason for her to sigh or roll her eyes, until one day, something unexpected happened. That afternoon, as I sat on the porch trying to enjoy a little sunlight, a man appeared at the gate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply, with kind eyes. He asked if I was Mrs. Harper and politely requested a moment to talk. He introduced himself as Ryan Cooper, the son of my late husband. The whole world seemed to stop around me. Ryan, the illegitimate child I had only heard mentioned at my husband's funeral, the one he had hidden from me for 35 years, was now standing right in front of me. I didn't know what to say or how to react. Seeing my confusion, Ryan gently said he didn't want to intrude. He had simply heard that I was ill and wanted to check if I was doing all right. Laura stepped out onto the porch, clearly irritated by his presence. Her voice was cold as she told him that I wasn't seeing visitors and that he should leave. But in Ryan's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a very long time: genuine sincerity and compassion. A sincerity I hadn't felt in years. That day, Ryan didn't stay long. He only said he would come back another time to talk properly, then left. Laura was restless the whole afternoon, muttering that he was shameless for showing up like that, as if he were trying to take advantage. I said nothing, but something inside me stirred, maybe curiosity, or perhaps a spark of hope I thought had long died. In the days that followed, I began to reflect on my life. I realized I had always been the one holding everything together in the family, always there when someone needed help. When Michael divorced his first wife, he stayed in my house for almost a year, eating my food, using my electricity and water, sleeping on my couch. I never complained or asked for anything in return because I thought that was what a mother was supposed to do. I remembered when Laura suffered from postpartum depression after having her second child. I dropped everything and moved in with her for 4 months. I stayed up at night with the baby, cooked, cleaned, and did everything I could so she could recover. I never thought of it as an obligation. I did it out of love. For years, I was the grandmother who picked up the kids when their parents were busy, took them to the doctor when they were sick, the one always present at every family event, cooking, cleaning, preparing everything. No one ever asked if I was tired, if I needed rest, or if I had dreams of my own. I was seen only as an extension of the family, always available, never saying no, never having any priority for myself, and I accepted it, thinking that was love. When my husband Robert passed away, I discovered our finances were worse than I had ever imagined. He had always handled the money, and I trusted him completely. I found debts I never knew existed, hidden loans he had taken. Alongside the grief of losing him, I had to face creditors, paperwork, and decisions I had never made on my own before. It was Michael who advised me to sell the old house. He said it was the sensible choice, that I didn't need so much space anymore, that the money could pay off the debts and leave enough for me to live comfortably. Back then, I believed him. But looking back now, I realize he just wanted to solve things quickly, without thinking about my future. I sold the home I had lived in for more than 30 years, the place where I raised my children, filled with memories. I paid off Robert's debts, helped Michael with the down payment on his new house, gave Laura some money to remodel her kitchen, and what was left wasn't enough for me to live decently. When I moved into Laura's home, she said it would only be temporary, just until I adjusted and figured out what I wanted next. But as time passed, I realized I was nothing more than an unpaid housekeeper. I cooked, cleaned, watched the children, and in return, all I had was a small room and a few shared meals. I never complained because I already felt like a burden. I thought I should be grateful just to have a place to stay. Whenever Laura talked about money, I felt guilty simply for existing. I began eating less, turning off the lights early, refusing to go out to save expenses. My life became mechanical, empty. I woke up early, made breakfast for everyone, took the kids to school, cleaned the house, picked them up in the afternoon, cooked dinner. At night, I sat quietly in my room, watching TV with the volume barely audible. Gradually, I lost myself. I was no longer Denise, I was just Grandma, the live-in helper who never had a voice, an opinion, or a dream of her own. Whenever the family made decisions, I was always the last to know. When they planned vacations, I automatically became the one who stayed behind to watch the house. When they bought new things, the only question they asked me was whether it fit the budget. The feeling of loneliness inside a full house is one of the deepest pains there is. I was surrounded by family, yet I felt invisible, like an old piece of furniture no one could bring themselves to throw away. I tried talking to the kids, but they always had something better to do. I tried starting conversations with Laura, but she was always busy with work, with her phone, with everything except me. Michael only stopped by occasionally, always in a hurry, always with something else on his mind. He would kiss my cheek in passing, ask, "How are you, Mom?" but never stayed long enough to hear the answer. I had become a social obligation, someone people visited out of duty, not love. I started losing sleep, lying awake for hours, wondering how my life had become so small and meaningless. I used to be a strong woman, once had a career, dreams, and plans. Now I was just a silent caregiver no one truly appreciated. When the first symptoms of illness appeared, I tried my best to hide them. I was afraid of being seen as even more of a burden, afraid they would say I was making their lives harder. I quietly massaged my trembling hands, did memory exercises, tried to speak clearly so they wouldn't think I was losing my mind, but I couldn't hide it forever. The tremors worsened, my body weakened, and my memory faded. Laura began looking at me suspiciously, as if I were faking it. She often made cruel comments about old people pretending to be sick just to manipulate their kids. I tried to explain that I wasn't pretending, that something was truly wrong, but she always dismissed me, saying I was overreacting, that everyone my age had those little issues. When I insisted this was different, she sighed in frustration, looking at me as if I were a stubborn child. My son-in-law, David, started mocking my condition. He imitated my trembling hands at the dinner table, joked that I was losing my mind, and hinted about nursing homes as if it were a quiet threat. Laura laughed at his jokes while I sat silently, feeling humiliated but too afraid to react. I realized my presence had become an inconvenience. I was tolerated, not loved, accepted, but never valued. Worse still, I began to believe it was natural, the inevitable fate of every woman who grows old. In that fragile state of mind, I received the diagnosis of a rare neurological syndrome. I was too weak, too used to being treated as a burden. When the doctor confirmed that I truly was ill and needed special care, part of me felt relieved to finally have an explanation, but another part of me already knew what was coming. I knew my children. I knew how they thought that their own lives always came first. A sick mother didn't fit into their life plans. I would only ever be an obstacle. Still, a naive spark of hope lingered that family love would prevail, that they would find a way to keep me close, that they would show the compassion I had once given them. But I was wrong, completely wrong. 3 days after that cold conversation, Ryan returned. This time Laura wasn't home, so I could finally speak with him without interruptions. He sat beside me on the porch, and for the first time in years, someone truly listened to me. Ryan told me his life story with a sincerity that touched me deeply. He said that he had always known who his father was, but his mother Clara had forbidden him from contacting our family. She was a proud woman, a seamstress who raised him alone without asking anyone for help. When Ryan was a child and asked about his father, she would simply say, "He has his own family. Son, we shouldn't disturb them." Clara passed away when Ryan was 22 from cervical cancer. Before she died, she made him promise never to seek anything from his biological father. "We've always managed on our own," she told him. "And we always will." Ryan kept that promise for years, even through hardship, even while working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. He said he found out that Robert, my husband, had died from a colleague who knew our family. The man mentioned the accident, the tragic loss, and Ryan had felt moved. Even though he had never met his father, he felt the need to say goodbye. Ryan told me that on the day of the funeral, he had stood far away, watching my family gathered together, and felt an overwhelming sadness, the kind that comes from never belonging to the very blood you share. But he didn't approach. Afraid of hurting me further, afraid of being seen as disrespectful in a moment of grief. When he later heard that I was sick and abandoned by my own children, something stirred in him. He said he couldn't bear the thought of an elderly woman enduring such pain alone. Ryan worked in construction. He didn't make much, but he had something my own children lacked: a kind and generous heart. As we talked, I began noticing small things that moved me deeply. Ryan had the same eyes as Robert, and the way he gestured with his hands while speaking reminded me so much of him. There was a gentleness in Ryan that made me remember the man I once loved before life, made him distant and cold. Ryan asked about my illness, how I was feeling, and what kind of care I needed. No one had ever asked me those things. Not Michael, not Laura, not my grandchildren, not anyone in my family. To them, I was just a problem to be managed, not a person who needed care. I told Ryan about the tremors, the exhaustion, and my fading memory. He listened patiently, asking questions, showing real concern. When I mentioned my children's coldness, Ryan said nothing. His face softened with quiet sadness. He didn't criticize them. He simply shook his head, and at that moment, I broke down in tears. Not out of sorrow, but from a strange, forgotten feeling. The feeling of being truly seen and cared for. Ryan handed me a handkerchief and sat beside me in silence, letting me release everything I'd held inside. When I finally calmed down, he said something that completely changed how I saw my life. "You don't deserve to be treated that way. Getting older isn't a reason to be thrown away. You still matter." Those words were like medicine to my heart. From that day on, Ryan began visiting me regularly. He came after work, his clothes covered in dust and cement, tired but always bringing fruit, herbal medicine, or small gifts to show he cared. Laura was openly annoyed, but couldn't stop him. One day, while Ryan was there, I had a severe episode. My body shook violently. My speech stuttered. My vision blurred. Laura panicked, not knowing what to do. Ryan, though not trained medically, stayed calm. He helped me sit down, offered water, and spoke softly until I steadied. When the episode passed, Laura was genuinely frightened. She realized my condition was more serious than she had thought, that I needed constant care. But instead of compassion, that realization made her want to avoid me even more. She began saying she wasn't capable of taking care of someone sick, that she couldn't keep watch over me all the time. Ryan immediately offered to stay the night to make sure I didn't have another episode, and Laura agreed without hesitation, relieved that someone else could take responsibility. That night, he slept on the couch, waking up several times to check on me. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and toasted bread. Ryan had gotten up early to prepare a simple but comforting breakfast. He helped me out of bed, gently guiding me to the table, moving as naturally as if he had done it his whole life. In that moment, I realized a painful truth. For years, I had been content with the scraps of affection from my own children, accepting their indifference as if it were normal. Yet here was a man who owed me nothing, treating me with more respect and kindness than I had ever received. I began to ask myself, why did I ever accept being treated like a burden? Why had I never demanded respect? Why had I always put everyone else's needs before my own? Those questions stirred something deep inside me, like I was waking up after years of silence. Ryan noticed the look on my face and asked if I was all right. I told him what I'd been thinking, that I was beginning to see life differently. Ryan smiled and said, "It's never too late to reclaim your dignity," that I still deserved respect. That afternoon, Michael came to visit. He'd heard from Laura about my illness and came to check on me, but I wasn't silent anymore. When he started talking about nursing homes and how they couldn't afford to take care of me, I interrupted. I asked if he remembered how many times I'd sacrificed for him, the sleepless nights when he was sick, the money I spent on his education, the times I helped him through hardship. Michael looked uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but I wouldn't let him. I told him that I had always been the first person he turned to when he needed help. Yet now, when I needed him most, he turned his back. Michael tried to justify himself, saying things were different now, that he had his own family, that he couldn't take on responsibilities that weren't his. His words made my blood boil. I told him, "Taking care of your mother isn't a burden. It's a responsibility. I'm not a stranger. I'm the one who gave up my life for you." The argument grew heated. Michael raised his voice, saying I was being unfair, that he never asked to be born, and that he had no obligation to take care of me in my old age. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I suddenly realized I had raised two ungrateful children who only came to me when they needed something. Ryan, who had been standing quietly in the kitchen through the whole argument, stepped into the living room. He didn't say a word, but his presence spoke volumes. A man who owed me nothing was willing to help, while my own flesh and blood had abandoned me. Michael stormed out, furious, saying I was becoming difficult and that my illness was making me aggressive. But I knew this wasn't sickness, it was awakening. It was the moment a woman finally recognized her own worth and refused to be treated as invisible. That night, I talked with Ryan for hours. He said he admired me for standing up to my son and reminded me never to let anyone diminish my value again. For the first time in many years, I felt respected, seen as a person with dignity. After my confrontation with Michael, the atmosphere at home became suffocating. Laura was colder than ever, avoiding me as if I were a ticking bomb. She made excuses to go out whenever Ryan visited and complained loudly about everything I did. One tense afternoon, I sat in my room looking at the few belongings I had left and realized it was time to do something for myself. I couldn't keep waiting for love or pity from people too selfish to feel either. I opened my wallet, counted the little money I had left, not much, but enough to start something new. I remembered my distant cousin Nora, who lived alone in a small apartment downtown. She had been widowed for years, and every time we ran into each other, she spoke about how lonely she was. I decided to call her. I briefly explained my situation, not emphasizing the tragedy, just that I was looking for a place to live, to share expenses and companionship. She sounded genuinely happy about the idea, saying she'd been wanting someone to live with, especially family. Nora invited me to see the apartment. It was small but tidy, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Not fancy, but warm and spotless. She showed me the spare room, simple but with a window facing the street, where sunlight poured in every morning. We discussed arrangements. I'd pay half the rent, split utilities, and each of us would handle our own meals. Nora said she didn't mind my health condition since she herself had high blood pressure and diabetes. We could look out for each other. That conversation rekindled a hope I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I was making a decision for my own life, no one else's. I told Nora I agreed and would move in as soon as possible. When I returned to Laura's house, I said nothing about my plan. Quietly, I packed my things, choosing what to take, leaving what didn't matter. I didn't have much. A few clothes, a couple of shoes, some old photos, and a few beloved books. Everything fit into 2 small suitcases. The next day, Ryan came over and immediately noticed something different, a spark of new energy, a determination he hadn't seen before. I told him about my decision to move in with Nora, that I was tired of being treated like a burden. He listened quietly, then said I was brave. He offered to help me move, saying he'd borrow a friend's truck and go with me, helping me without asking for anything in return. We agreed to move on the following Saturday. All week, I went about my usual routine, but inside, I was counting down the days. Laura noticed I was quieter than usual, but she didn't ask why. Maybe she sensed something was changing, she just didn't care enough to ask. On Friday night, I decided to tell her. After she put the kids to bed, I sat down with her and said I'd found a new place to live and would be moving out the next day. Laura looked surprised at first, but I could see the relief in her eyes. She asked where I was going and whether I could manage on my own. Laura didn't object, didn't seem sad or worried. She just said, "Maybe that's for the best." That night, I slept better than I had in months. For the first time in so long, I was doing something for myself. When I woke up on Saturday morning, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Ryan arrived right on time, bringing the borrowed truck and his warm smile. He helped me carry my things, treated Laura politely, showing no judgment or resentment. When I was ready to leave, Laura gave me a half-hearted hug and said I could call if I needed anything. The move went smoother than I expected. Nora welcomed me with coffee and pastries, helped me unpack, and showed me around her cozy apartment. Ryan put together a small bookshelf for me, made sure I was comfortable, and didn't leave until he was certain I was settled. That first night at Nora's, I felt freer than ever. I no longer feared being a burden or worried about bothering anyone. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I began paying my share of the rent and bills, and I was treated as an equal. Nora turned out to be a wonderful companion. She respected my need for quiet but was always ready to chat when I wanted. We shared a rhythm, waking up early, enjoying TV dramas, dividing chores, without ever arguing. In those first few weeks, Ryan continued to visit often. He brought my medication, asked how I was adjusting, and listened to me talk about my health and feelings. Nora took to him immediately, saying it was rare to meet such a polite and kind young man. One day, during a visit, Ryan made a suggestion that would change my life. He said he'd been researching my condition and found that physical therapy and some alternative treatments might help. He offered to take me to appointments, therapy sessions, and help with whatever I needed. When I asked why he was doing all this, Ryan simply said, "Because you deserve to be cared for with respect. No one should face illness alone, and I have the time and the heart to help." There was no hidden motive, just genuine kindness. I agreed to accept his help, but made it clear I didn't want to be a burden. Ryan chuckled and said I wasn't anyone's burden, that I had worth as a person, and that taking care of me was an honor, not an obligation. From then on, we settled into a new routine. Ryan drove me to doctor's appointments, waited while I had tests done, took notes on what the doctor said, reminded me to take my medication, and encouraged me to keep up my therapy. Little by little, I began to feel stronger, not just because of the treatments, but because someone truly cared about me. The deep wounds in my self-esteem started to heal bit by bit. Nora saw it all, and often said Ryan was an angel in my life, that I had finally found a real son when I needed one the most. Her words made me think deeply about what family really means, that sometimes blood isn't the strongest bond. Michael and Laura didn't call for weeks. I didn't miss them, in fact. I felt relieved not to deal with their constant negativity. For the first time in years, I was surrounded only by people who treated me with kindness and respect. I began thinking more clearly about the future. I had a small amount of savings, a modest pension, and was living simply, but with dignity. More importantly, I had Ryan, someone who wasn't just a caretaker, but had become a son of my heart. A thought crossed my mind, one that seemed absurd at first, but soon began to make sense. If Ryan was giving his time and love to care for me like a real son, perhaps it was time I acknowledged that in a meaningful way. 3 months after moving in with Nora, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Thompson, the attorney who had handled my late husband Robert's estate. He said he needed to meet urgently about an inheritance matter. I was surprised, thinking everything had been settled long ago. Ryan, seeing I was nervous, offered to come with me, and I agreed. At the office, Mr. Thompson greeted us with a serious but satisfied expression. He said he'd uncovered something remarkable. It turned out that Robert's father, my late father-in-law, had left behind a piece of land in the Oregon suburbs years ago. The property had been forgotten for decades, listed under several family members' names, including Robert's, and no one remembered it existed. Recently, a mining company had contacted the heirs after discovering a deposit of rare sand on that land. They wanted to buy the property for a very large sum, and since Robert was deceased, I was his legal heir. I was stunned when I heard the number, nearly $400,000, an amount I had never even dreamed of. Mr. Thompson confirmed that all documents were legitimate, the company was reputable, and all I had to do was sign to receive the payment. Ryan was overjoyed for me, saying it was a blessing that I finally had the financial stability to live the rest of my life in peace. But deep down, I felt something else, a realization that this money had arrived precisely when I had discovered the true meaning of family. It wasn't about blood. It was about those who love, respect, and stand by you when you're at your weakest. I signed all the necessary papers, and just a few weeks later, the money was transferred into my account. It was hard to believe the number I saw on the bank statement, knowing that in an instant I had become a woman of means. But instead of pure relief, I felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over me. The first thing I did was talk to Nora about our new situation. I suggested buying a bigger apartment so we could live more comfortably, but she refused. Nora said she loved her current home, that we didn't need luxury, only peace. In the end, we decided to simply renovate the apartment a little and share the living expenses more evenly. With Ryan, our conversations became deeper. I learned that he had always dreamed of opening a small woodworking shop. He worked construction only out of necessity. But his real passion was crafting with wood. He showed me a few pieces of furniture he had made himself, intricate, beautifully detailed works of art. I offered to lend him money to start his workshop, but Ryan immediately refused. He said he couldn't accept money from me, that caring for me was already more than enough. I insisted, explaining that it wasn't charity, it was an investment in someone I saw as family. Still, Ryan stood firm, and in that moment, an idea struck me, one that would change everything. If Ryan didn't want help while I was alive, perhaps I should make sure he was recognized after I was gone. I began to think seriously about my will, how I wanted my estate to be divided. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, to discuss drafting a new will. I made it clear that I wanted to leave everything to Ryan because he was the only one who had truly cared for and loved me when my own children had abandoned me. The lawyer looked surprised but confirmed that I had every right to do so. He also reminded me that my biological children could still file a claim to contest the inheritance under U.S. law if they could prove financial dependency. However, he suggested another solution. I could legally gift the assets while still alive, keeping only a small portion for my personal and medical expenses. That way, when I passed, there would be nothing substantial left to dispute. I decided to do exactly that. I transferred $350,000 to Ryan through a legal gift arrangement, keeping $50,000 for myself. In the will, I specified that the remaining amount would also go to Ryan. By doing so, my biological children would have virtually no claim to my assets since most of it had already been given away while I was alive. I wrote in the will that Ryan had shown genuine love and devotion, that he deserved to be recognized as my only true son. Mr. Thompson confirmed that gifting assets during one's lifetime was completely legal and that the will would simply formalize the small portion left. I didn't tell anyone, not even Ryan. The lawyer said he would only know about it if I chose to tell him or after my death. I kept that secret as my final declaration about what family truly means. My health continued to improve, thanks to Ryan's devoted care. The physical therapy reduced my tremors. My medication was better managed, and most importantly, my spirit was calm and happy again. Having someone who truly cared made everything different. Ryan kept visiting regularly, always bringing something small but meaningful. A pastry from the bakery, a few flowers from a friend's garden, or a handmade wooden trinket. Nora often said Ryan was a miracle in my life, that I was lucky to have met someone like him. And then one day, what I had long suspected finally happened. Michael showed up at Nora's apartment, saying he wanted to see me because he was worried about Mom. He'd heard from acquaintances that I no longer lived with Laura. I welcomed him politely, but there was no joy in my heart. Michael talked as if nothing had ever happened, as if he hadn't abandoned me when I needed him most. He asked about my health, my finances, whether I needed help with anything. I told him I was fine, that I was living among people who truly cared, and that I no longer needed help from those who had once turned their backs on me. His face hardened, and he tried to justify himself by saying the family had been going through a rough time. Then suddenly, He brought up the inheritance he'd heard about, saying he just wanted to help manage the large amount safely. At that moment, I understood he wasn't there out of concern, but for money. I told Michael that my finances were already well managed, that I had professional help, and didn't need any assistance. But he persisted, saying that as my son, he had a right to know about my situation, that he was just worried about my future. Right then, Ryan arrived as he usually did around that time. The contrast between them was striking. Michael, well-dressed but with greed in his eyes. Ryan, simple, sincere, and radiating genuine kindness. Ryan came in wearing his work clothes, only wanting to know if I was feeling well or needed anything. I introduced them and explained that Ryan was the son of my late husband and that he had become very important in my life. Michael looked uncomfortable, especially when he saw how Ryan gently helped me stand, asked if I'd taken my medication, and cared for me so naturally and warmly. The visit was brief and tense. Before leaving, Michael said he'd come back to talk more, that family should stay in touch. I smiled politely, but deep down I knew he would only return if there was something to gain. After Michael left, Ryan asked if I was all right, if the visit had made me upset. I told him I was calm, that I no longer expected anything from my biological children, because I had found my true family, one made of people who truly deserved my love. That evening, I told Nora everything. She said she felt sorry for Michael and Laura, that they didn't understand what they had lost by being so cruel. Nora said maybe one day they would regret it. But by then, it would probably be too late. In the months that followed, my life became more balanced and peaceful than ever. My health was stable, my finances secure, my home serene, and most importantly, I was surrounded by people who truly loved me. Ryan remained my son of the heart, kind, thoughtful, and always present. Laura stopped by a few times, making excuses for why she hadn't kept in touch sooner. I welcomed her politely, but kept my distance. I knew, just like Michael, that her concern was for my assets, not for me. As time went on, I became more certain that my decision about the will had been completely right. Ryan had never once asked about money, never hinted that he deserved a share, never showed a trace of greed. He simply lived with kindness, cared for me, and loved me as a true son would. I knew it was only a matter of time before my biological children learned the truth, that I had left everything to Ryan. I knew they'd be angry, call me unfair, try to contest it. But my heart was at peace. Emotional justice had been served fully and fairly. Those who loved me sincerely would receive everything. Those who abandoned me would receive nothing. For the first time in years, I lived with my own dignity, valued for who I was, not for what I had. Ryan didn't know that while I was still alive, he already owned most of what I had and would one day be my only heir. But each night, I slept peacefully, knowing that justice had been restored, that the illegitimate son had been rewarded for becoming the kind of child my own never learned to be. That inheritance was merely a symbol of something far greater, the genuine love we built together. Denise's story is a work of fiction, inspired by real experiences shared by many. Names and places have been changed to protect privacy. It reminds us that sometimes family isn't defined by blood, but by kindness and respect. When hurt by those closest to us, should we stay silent to keep the peace or speak up to defend our dignity? Whatever path we choose, the most important thing is to keep faith that God always sees the truth in our hearts. He blesses those who live with love, honesty, and compassion. Thank you for watching until the end of the story. Please subscribe, and don't forget to choose 2 videos from the end screen where each story reminds us that justice and love still exist, no matter the circumstance.